Daytime television may make theater of the subject, but paternity testing is a serious business with a long tradition. Since the beginning of human history, much of one's life, its psychological, social, and legal realities, has depended on the identity of one's father. So quite naturally, science has been drafted into the service of paternity testing ever since genetic techniques for distinguishing individuals were first developed. Until the advent of molecular genetics, blood itself was the most scientific clue to paternity. The patterns of inheritance were reliable and well understood, but with only a handful of blood groups to test for, the trait's power to discriminate was limited. Practically speaking, a test for blood type has limited power to exclude wrongly accused fathers, and it can never provide definitive affirmation of the right one. If our blood types are not compatible, I am assuredly not your father. But if they are, it's no certain proof that I am. The same will be true of any number of men who have the same blood type I have. Using other markers in addition to the familiar ABO blood group markers improves the resolving power of this kind of test, but it still cannot match the statistical muscle of STR typing. An STR-based genetic fingerprint can establish proof positive of paternity. And in the era of PCR, it is convenient enough to use. So convenient, in fact, that mail-order paternity testing companies do a thriving business. In some cities, huge roadside billboards advertise a local paternity testing service with the none-too-subtle pitch line, "Who's the daddy?" For a fee, these companies will mail you a DNA sampling kit that includes a swab to scrape some cells from the interior of the mouth. Samples collected this way would not stand up in court. To be admissible, a DNA fingerprint must be based on a sample collected by a certified lab, which must verify the chain of evidence so as to prevent the sort of genetic switcheroo we saw in the Pitchfork case. The tissue samples are sent by overnight courier to the testing laboratory where the DNA is extracted. The child's DNA fingerprint is compared with that of the mother. Any STR repeats present in the child but not in the mother are presumed to have come from the father, whoever he may be. If the fingerprint of a supposed father lacks any of these repeats, he must be excluded. If none are missing, the number of repeats allows us to quantify the likelihood that a match is definitive by the so-called paternity index, PI. This measures the chances that some man other than the actual father could have contributed a particular STR, and it varies in relation to how common a given STR is in the population. The PIs for all STRs are multiplied together to give a combined paternity index. Most paternity tests are, of course, handled with the utmost discretion, unless you happen to be on a talk show. But one recent analysis drew many headlines owing to the great historical interest in the alleged father. It had long been suspected that Thomas Jefferson, third President of the United States and the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, was more than a founding father. He was thought to have had one or more children by his slave, Sally Hemings. The first accusation was made in 1802, just 12 years after the birth of a boy, Tom, who later took the last name of one of his subsequent masters, Woodson. In addition, a strong resemblance to Jefferson had been widely remarked in Hemings' last son, Eston. DNA was destined to set the record straight. Jefferson had no legitimate male descendants, so it is impossible to determine the markers on his Y chromosome. Instead, researchers took DNA samples from male descendants of Jefferson's paternal uncle, Field Jefferson, whose Y chromosome would have been identical to the president's, and compared them with samples from the male descendants of Tom and Eston. The results showed a distinct Jefferson fingerprint for the Y chromosome. But this DNA fingerprint was not present in the descendants of Tom Woodson. Jefferson's reputation had dodged that bullet. In Eston Hemming's descendants, however, the Jeffersonian Y chromosome signature came through loud and clear. But what the DNA cannot confirm beyond reasonable doubt is the source of that chromosome. We cannot say with certainty whether Eston's father was in fact Thomas Jefferson or some other male in the Jefferson lineage who might also have had access to Sally Hemings. Indeed, some suspicions have been cast on Isham Jefferson, the president's nephew. Centuries of national reverence, then, are no protection against the harsh, revealing light of DNA evidence, nor, it seems, is any amount of celebrity or money. When the Brazilian model Luciana Morad claimed that Mick Jagger was the father of her son, whom she named Lucas Morad Jagger, the Rolling Stone denied it and demanded DNA testing. Perhaps Jagger was bluffing, hoping that the threat of a forensic denouement would weaken Ms. Morad's resolve and induce her to drop the case. But she did not. The tests were positive, and Jagger found himself legally obliged to contribute to the upbringing of his son. Boris Becker, too, submitted to a paternity test over a girl born to Russian model Angela Ermakova. The tabloids had a field day with stories that the tennis star believed himself the victim of a blackmail scheme contrived by the Russian mafia. The lurid details of how this plot was supposedly perpetrated are best left in the pages of the tabloids. Suffice it to say that when the DNA results were in, the swaggering Becker acknowledged his deed and pledged to support his daughter. DNA fingerprinting to identify a child's biological relatives has been applied to causes rather more uplifting than those of Messrs. Jagger and Becker. In Argentina, between 1975 and 1983, 15,000 people were quietly eliminated for holding opinions unpopular with the ruling military junta. Many of the children of the disappeared were subsequently placed in orphanages or adopted illegally by military officers. Having lost their own children to the regime, the mothers of the disappeared then set about finding their children's children to reclaim their grandchildren. Las abuelas, grandmothers, drew attention to their nationwide quest by marching every Thursday in the central square in Buenos Aires. They continue their search to this day. Once a child has been located, genetic fingerprinting methods can be used to determine who is related. Since 1984, Mary Claire King, whom we encountered earlier, grappling with another set of relationships, that between humans and chimpanzees, has provided Las Abuelas with the genetic analysis needed to reunite families torn apart by 8 nightmarish years of misrule.